Hello for Thursday over the peak. Let's start with China urges the US to boost confidence in debt and the dollar. Reuters tells us that China pressed the United States to take responsible measures to boost market confidence in the dollar and US government debt on Wednesday, underscoring investor worries that Washington could default on its debt. Unlikely. The urging from China's currency regulator came as US leaders tried to hammer out an 11th hour deal to raise the $14.3 trillion debt ceiling for the United States before it runs out of money to cover all its bills on August the 2nd. Wankers. Just 6% of likely US voters now rate Congress's performance as good or excellent, according to a new Rasmussen Report National Telephone Survey. 6% of likely US voters rate Congress's performance as good or excellent. Sounds about right. Over in the UK, Tullett Prebon and Dr. Tin Morgan has tidied up and finished his project Armageddon. Essential reading for UK people and other people, because most all of the subjects touched upon are pertinent to most countries in the OECD. So let's have a quick look. Part 1, the scale of the problem, kicks in with the real level of British indebtedness is widely misunderstood. The 75%, that's debt to GDP, reported public debt ratio excludes quasi-debt obligations, which lift the total to 167%. That's more than Greece. Bigorra. And even this number excludes huge potential commitments created by financial interventions. Together, mortgage and consumer debt total a further 97% of GDP. I was saddened by the start of this. Saddened I was, because I've read all of the others, I think. So I was waiting for this final one. The real level of British indebtedness is widely misunderstood, and that's the start of part 1. And this is the first paragraph. And then goes on to talk utter bollocks. The 75% reported debt ratio, that's if you go to the way the Europeans rate it. And yes, why not do it the same way as the Europeans rate it? Excludes quasi-debt obligations, which lift the total to 167%. Says who? And then, to make matters worse, to get to, at the bottom, puts in together mortgage and consumer debt totals a further 97%. Mortgage and consumer debt, in other words private debt, not government debt, are mashed together in the same paragraph of a 34-page PDF. When they should not be in the same paragraph, they should not be on the same page, they should not be under any sort of same heading. Let's move on. Nice charts. But look at this. Debt and estimated quasi-debt. This is, I pulled this out to go into the bollocks of the quasi-debt. Debt in black, fine. And if it's the 2-star European standard, that's what we know we're dealing with, that's fine. I think on this occasion it means it's not the European standard, it's the British standard. But as long as we know what we're dealing with, that's fine. PFI, private financial initiatives, investment, something like that anyway. It's a con, a way of putting off payments into the future. And this huge public sector pensions, light blue blob, and interventions, that's the banks, whether they should be in there or not, is completely strange, because they are liabilities, but banks have got assets as well, and I wouldn't put them in there. I'd have a separate section. But this public sector pensions and the PFI is what I want to deal with here. And just underneath the chart we get the reading of this, highlighted obviously. The British system of providing pensions for government employees has always been something of a Ponzi scheme. It's not something of a Ponzi scheme, it is a Ponzi scheme, which is fair enough. That just happens to be what it is. The pensions of retirees being paid out of the contributions of the current workers, with the Treasury making up any annual difference. It's just completely wrong, but that's too confusing to go into. The current unfunded public sector pension obligations stand at 1,800 loads of billions, over $1 trillion. What the hell does that mean? Current unfunded public sector pension obligation. How far into the future do you go? Do you go 100 years into the future? All 100 years of future pensions are not funded now. Is that significant? No, it's not. So should it be 100 years that you put in to make that figure? Should it be 50 years, 20 years, 10 years? How about 1 year? Pensions that be paid out for public sector workers are not funded now. Next year's aren't. But then neither of the wages of the members of the House of Commons, nor the bar staff at the House of Commons, nor the money for the anything, nothing's funded now. It's just not the way you do things. So why pick out that and say it's unfunded liabilities? It's just moronically stupid and confusing when this is meant to be helpful, and it's not helpful. To which can be added, perhaps, 170 billion of outstanding commitments under the PFI, Private Financial Initiatives contracts. Perhaps, or perhaps not. Well, state why and what. And as soon as you have to say why, you understand that you're talking bollocks. Because they're not funded now, and that's why the PFIs have been structured like that. So they don't have to be paid for now, they're paid for in the future, like the pensions. And you've either got the money for them or you haven't. What you've got is expanding liabilities. They're not unfunded liabilities. Calling them unfunded doesn't do anybody any good at all. It is wholly unhelpful. Accepting that they're expanding liabilities, that you've got these hospitals built now and said that you'll pay for them later, is helpful, because you know that you're going to have more money to pay for them later. That's helpful, calling them expanded liabilities. Pensions, because there have been more in the past and more working in the past, more people are going to retire in the future. They're going to be expanding pensions, not unfunded. Calling them unfunded is not helpful. Calling them expanding amount of pensions that are going to have to be paid for is helpful, and keep them off the bloody charts. Or make new charts accepting that they're expanding. Calling them unfunded is stupid. Stephanie Kelton over in the United States, banging on about a similar thing. So, United States. The Hospital Insurance Trust Fund is expected to remain solvent until 2029. The Disability Insurance Fund is projected to become exhausted in 2018. And the Old Age and Survivors Insurance Trust Fund is considered adequately financed until 2040. In contrast, Part B, supplemental medical insurance, which pays for doctor's bills and other outpatient expenses, and Part D, George Bush's wild idea, which pays for access to prescription drug coverage, are both projected to remain adequately funded and into the infinite future, because current law automatically provides financing each year to meet the next year's expected costs. In other words, it is sustainable indefinitely, because the government is committed to making the payments indefinitely. Just because morons do moronic things in the past, it doesn't mean that modern morons have to commit the same moronic errors. They have said moronically that they're trust funds. They're not trust funds. That's just a lie. They're just paid out of... They're just paid. And because some idiot said they were trust funds, some poor bastards have to stay in an office and do the abacus bean counter thing and do the accounting as though they were trust funds. And then the press come along and ask them for their results and say, oh, well, this is going to run out of funds in 2018, when it's not a trust fund at all. It's just wasting people's time. They are all just paid. And when you got the facts that they're not unfunded liabilities, they're expanding liabilities, you can get your political, if that's necessary, or economic head-on to make appropriate decisions. And this is another aspect of what you might want to base your thinking upon. The US population in millions and the projected increases, among other things. You might want to take into account things like Singapore inflation rises to 5.2%. You might want to take into account inflation rises by 14.6% in Vietnam at the bottom. Annual inflation hit 22.16% in July, setting a pace well above the government target of 17%. News in Asia gives us Australia forklift mishap destroys 1 million of Shiraz wine. More than 1 million Aussie dollars, only Aussie dollars, points, of wine have been destroyed in a forklift accident in Australia. The 2010 Molly Duca velvet glove Shiraz sells for lots of money a bottle, and they drop the container by the look of it. Accidents happen. China fires top officials as railway crash kills 35. China has fired 3 senior railway officials following a high-speed train crash that left 35 people dead. The government has also halted services of 58 other trains and called for a nationwide safety check. The accident is the latest in a series of problems for the high-speed network, which has been dogged by controversies including accusations of corruption. Caixin gives us the Ministry of Railways, why not Railways, is seeing its financials worsening following leapfrog high-speed railway infrastructure development nationwide. The ministry booked 15 million yuan in profit for 2010, a drop in the bucket compared to its revenue of 700 billion yuan for the year. Only making there's no profit at all, and that's a big turnover. The most pressing issue facing the ministry is its huge debt to repay this year and cash strain amid rising costs. According to the Ministry of Railways annual report released on July 14th, the ministry had 160 billion yuan in cash flow, 160 billion in cash flow from operating activities last year. This is in comparison to 150 billion yuan of due debt and interest to service. The cash flow is equivalent to the amount of debt and interest to service during the same period, which means that the railway ministry had to borrow to pay off old debts. Over in Alphaville, Financial Times, the Fed's 1.6 trillion somethings. Chris Cook, strategic market consultant, entrepreneur and commentator, likes to push boundaries when it comes to financial thinking. Here he is again on Tuesday in the Asia Times, this time questioning the world's current understanding of what bank money is. Also how it relates to quantitative easing. What is he? Pushing the boundaries by actually thinking. Don't worry, it won't catch on. So what's at issue? It all revolves around Ben Bernanke's quantitative easing, and especially with regard to the traditional understanding on how an economy works via tax and spend. Oh dear. This is ordinarily wealth is produced, taxed, and then redistributed back into the economy, and it goes on MMT has hit the Financial Times, and read the comment section. It makes them go berserk. And bless him, Chris Cook comes into the comment section and, as MMT people do, put everybody at ease by answering their questions easily and clearly about how things actually are. Bye.